Hey guys, welcome back to another episode on the Corner Flag Talk podcast. It's your boy John. We are in the international break. As us, we like to use these opportunities to do something a bit out of the ordinary. And now, this is like his third time coming on the show. We have Elliott from the award winning Arsenal Vision podcast. Elliott, how are you going?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Always a pleasure to talk to you, John. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming. So, guys, what we're doing today is we're gonna go through team by team. Actually, may or may not contain some Arsenal bias in the analysis of how their season has been going and how it is. Us as outsiders view how they are going, and we'll leave Arsenal to last, where we'll go into a little bit more depth into those stuff. So, starting at the team that is the furthest bottom would be Chelsea Football Club. Elliot, as an outsider looking in, Poch has taken over. There has been this whole Bowley revolution and the policy of buying as many players as you possibly can. How has been your perception of them so far this season?
I think Chelsea are a little tough to evaluate because they're integrating a lot of players and they have a lot of injuries. And they're integrating a new manager and they're coming from such a low point. And I don't know that they've necessarily had the sharpest recruitment, but they've replaced that sharpness in thinking with volume, right? With pure volume, just acquiring a lot of players expensively.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can deny that they've acquired a lot of talent. And look, there are a few clubs I hate as much as Chelsea Football Club. But if we're going to do analysis, we need to do honest analysis. My honest analysis is I think they have the bones of something that works. I think they
Mm-hmm.
have some very talented defenders. I'm not sure about the keeper, but I think the defenders are talented. Reece James, unfortunately, doesn't look like he can ever stay fit. I mean, unfortunately for them, I, I really do think that with Enzo and Caicedo, they have something in midfield, and Kunku's still to come in. Jackson is tough to evaluate because he misses chances, but he creates opportunities. Sterling has played better than he had in previous seasons, but he's getting towards the end. Everybody who knows me knows I don't rate Mudryk, but there's something there. And given that I think there are a lot of other big clubs that are in worse shape, my instinct is to say that eventually the raw talent they've acquired will coalesce into something that works, that brings them some measure of success. I'm not talking about necessarily titles or Champions Leagues like they used to measure success, but I think the days of being able to laugh at them openly,
Mm-hmm.
mock them, and
Mm-hmm.
see them in mid-table might be numbered. And the one caveat I'll put on that, their underlying metrics have been pretty good, but they haven't acquired points at the rate that they would have liked. And they've had a very, very easy fixture list so far. So they've got a very, very, very tough run ahead where they face
Yeah.
all the big clubs, all the top six type contenders in a row. And I think if it goes poorly, it could be the end of Poch, and then they're back at square one, and we'll see what they do from there.
Yeah, I was actually gonna bring out the fixture list next. Was that as you will know that we have to play them next when we return from the international break. Then they host Brentford, visit Spurs, host City, visit Newcastle, host Brighton, and then visit United. That
Yeah.
is a really tricky run. And as you said, the underlying metrics have been really good, but the eye test hasn't passed thus for the earlier parts of the season. I think the last few fixtures they have looked substantially better, and I think a big part of that is simply like just playing players in their right positions. We saw at the start of the season where they were playing in a system that I was thinking about it and really remind me of us under Emery, where we would have played five defenders and then three, six, or eight in midfield and just Lacan or one top. And for them, it was the same thing with like Sterling and Jackson on top and Gallagher and these guys in midfield. And even though they might be getting into more dangerous positions, these guys just are the players that you want on the end of chances or the ones to be creating your chances. And as they've integrated more players, Raheem has catch form, Cole Palmer has looked like a really good signing from Manchester City. They
Mm.
have been looking substantially better. I'm actually a really big fan of Cole Palmer. There's parts of him that remind me of our ex-Arsenal player in Alex Hebb, actually. The way that
Interesting.
he can really just drift with the ball and it looks glued to his feet, a little effortless at times. But yeah, I expect good things from Chelsea. So if you had to project forward now, would you say that Champions League football could be something that they should be aiming for or could see at the end of the season?
I think we'll know that pretty soon, right? I mean, if they accumulate some points during the run that you outlined, then I think you have to count them in as one of the potential clubs that will compete for it, because I wouldn't say that it's the stiffest competition. I think City and Arsenal are obviously very good. Liverpool are good but not balanced. I don't buy the Spurs hype. United are terrible. Brighton are going to be stretched with European competition, look a little bit defensively suspect. Newcastle are starting to look better, but like I don't think there's anyone that you would say has a God given right to it. And let's face it, fifth, I think, is going to be Champions League this season.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Chelsea are in with a shout. They have some ground to gain. And ultimately, I think how they perform over the run of fixtures you just outlined will indicate whether they have a chance to be there in the final reckoning.
Yeah.
I suspect they might, but
Hmm.
they could also really collapse during that run and feel like
Yeah.
they're in a downward spiral and sack the manager and just be back in chaos. It's hard to predict.
Yeah, and speaking of chaos, right above them in the table is Manchester United, who are 4 wins and 4 losses. I mean, talk about perfect symmetry. And the last win came from last 2 minute goals from Scott McTominay in the last couple of minutes of the game. And I think that now, and this is where, Elliot, I really, really, really believe in the data, and that like United last season, it screamed unsustainable for large parts of it, scoring from a ton of low XG chances, over reliant on one source of goals, and then being reliant on the opposition missing their chances, despite they already played in a low block. Now it's second season Ten Hag. He's moved the line higher up. He's trying to play more to the brand that we knew him to have at Ajax,
Mm.
and they are being ransacked. And now parts of it is just is players performing poorly. But this is where I really think where data football, part of me really do believe that it's almost inevitable at some point where you can't, and this is the same thing with like us when we under Unai Emery again, where we had that 18 run of on being unbeaten, and then all of a sudden results weren't coming, and it's because the football just doesn't lie in the end, and that is what I feel like when it comes to United. Do you feel the same?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, you have to acknowledge they've had injuries, and that's
Yeah,
caused them to struggle. I think the midfield looks supremely imbalanced. I think
yeah,
Mason Mount was probably the wrong player for them, and
mm-hmm,
the decision to play Mason Mount in midfield and move Bruno out wide has not worked. And I think
mm-hmm,
United fans are frustrated by that. Casemiro looks pretty done to me. And the
mm-hmm.
data suggests he's pretty done. He's getting run past, he's getting dribbled past. I mean, the Wolves game at the start of the season was really eye opening.
Yeah,
Anytime Wolves dribbled through midfield, they just faced almost no resistance.
mm-hmm,
And as a result, United find themselves still capable to play on the counterattack, right? Because they have some good distribution from Ericsson or Bruno if they're deep. And then, Rashford still can cause trouble. I think Hoyland is pretty good.
I
I don't
really like him, honestly. I
yeah.
really like him as a profile, yeah.
Yeah, he looks pretty good. So you have to give them that. But I think if you can't control the midfield, you wind up in basketball games, and they've wound up in those, and they don't look solid at the back. When they try to attack, they get countered, and when they don't try to attack, their games are soporific. And so it just
Hmm.
the balance is totally wrong there. And I accept that injuries are impacting some of how they look, especially defensively. But I don't believe in Ten Hag. I think Ten Hag does. Ten Hag looks like a guy who read in a book what you're supposed to do if you want to play Pep style football. Whereas like Mikel is a great example of someone who fundamentally understands it and how to coach it and how to
Hmm.
build around it.
Yeah.
Whatever Ten Hag's trying, I don't think it works. I think they're really bad. I think that they have attacking quality through Bruno Hoyland and Rashford that'll mean that occasionally they get goals
Yeah.
in games that
Hmm.
you wouldn't expect them to. They sit deep, they'll counter that. They strike me as a team that might win a few big games unexpectedly, but they're going to just drop so many points against mediocre teams because of how poor they are in midfield. And Amrabat doesn't fix that. And Onana has been obviously a complete dumpster fire. One thing that could improve their situation is if Onana gets his act together. But
Yeah.
as it stands right now, that looks like a mess. So no, I would be pretty confident in saying that Ten Hag will get sacked before the end of the season. I think they're going to
Hmm.
go nowhere fast.
And I think it was one of my colleagues on his show had pointed this out, and it so screams correct with me that Onana's deficiencies have highlighted United's goal scoring issues a lot
Hmm.
more. Because last season, because of for all the his faults and all the clangers that he had in him, he was managed. He could have pulled out the unstoppable. He could have pulled out the unsavable shots and would have managed to keep them in games over and over and over again. And thus, the one goal margins was enough for them to get by and get points. Now they are conceding. And yes, Onana should be doing better. But even so, Allison is probably the best keeper in the world and has had errors so far this season. Liverpool are still in the top four. And my point being is that once your attack is that good, you could bypass some errors. And United's attack doesn't seem like it's structured well. And when we look at Arsenal, for example, prior to last season, I don't think anybody thought that Arsenal had elite attackers, probably elite talent, but not elite attackers. And in doing so, Arteta managed to create an attacking structure that we had Saka on 14 goals, Martinelli on 15, Odegaard on 15. Jesus, who missed 12 games for the season, had 11 goals in 24 games. You know, that is the level that an attacking structure can provide you. And I think that is somewhere, again, as you rightfully said, that this goes on Ten Hag, that he seems to be lacking that in that department. With United now, are they probably the one in all the contenders that you think have the least chance right now of probably making Champions League next year?
Hmm. Uh, I would. Well, let me ask you something. If you, I don't want to skip ahead, but right now, first of all, I think I'm correct in saying the top five are going to make Champions League, right?
It is highly likely. It is
Likely,
dependent
yeah.
on the
It's
country's
coefficient, right?
coefficients at the
Yeah,
end of that year.
right.
And England is already pretty good. And unless all the English teams come out in the round of 16, then it's very likely they're going to get it.
Yeah. So I mean, it, let's put it this way: if you had to say right now, who are the teams you feel confident won't make it? United are surely one of those teams you'd put in the group, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
based on the competition, and Chelsea look like the other. I don't know. Well, who would you have out right now?
I think the lowest for me is Manchester United simply
Yeah,
because, like, even with the injuries and even with those players coming back, it still does not solve. To me, what is their biggest issue is the fact that the midfield is extremely porous in the transition and is not capable of creating at a high enough rate to sustain any defensive errors they have. And so they will always end up in games where they will fall short of 3 points somewhat regularly. Not to the point that I don't think it's gonna ever get to the point where it's like Chelsea last season, where they're the bottom half of the table. Because at the end of the day, Bruno is capable of individual quality. Rashford is capable of phenomenal individual quality. Hoyland look like a good buy. Goals gets you buying games and change game states a lot.
true.
But in terms of sustaining that across the entirety of the season, I think that even last season they were really fortunate with the fact that Spurs fell off, Chelsea fell off, Liverpool took 30 games of the season to get their act together, and that is why I think they managed to get top four in the end. And I think now we just see, a lot of chickens coming home to roost for them. So
Yeah,
they would be for me who I would put last. You see, like, at least with Chelsea, I think the metrics support that there should be a turn. And even with them, as you rightfully said, a Konku comes back. Because, like, all Chelsea's problems right now feels more attacking, right? It didn't feel like if it was enough goals in the side. Their defensive metrics for the entire season has been fantastic. And I can't see a reason for that to change. Caldwell has started the season pretty good at left back. The Sassy has fit in decently well. Cucurella even has come back into the side and all of a sudden looks usable again. And on top of that, they have a good midfield screen in Enzo and Caicedo. So I think there's more reason for me to be a little bit more optimistic on Chelsea's chances of making Champions League compared to United right now.
I think that's right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. Going up the table again now. Next we have Newcastle. I mean, Newcastle had probably the hardest start anybody could have asked for to this season when they had to play Aston Villa, then City, then Liverpool, and probably should have come out of Liverpool with a lot more. But they've caught themselves. They had a massive result week before in the Champions League, which was, I mean, like, that's everything you love about football, right? A team being
Mhm.
able to overturn another team like that. And it feels to me like if they just built it on last season. I'm not sure if you feel the same way.
Newcastle is a tough one because I feel like I want to write them off, and maybe it's because I don't rate Eddie Howe, but you
Mm,
write them off at your peril. I mean, I think the biggest thing between everybody looking at Newcastle as a major threat and everybody not looking at Newcastle as a major threat basically boils down to Liverpool fluking a win at St. James's Park down to 10 men. And I say
mm,
fluking, I mean, I think Newcastle got up in that game. They had chances to bury Liverpool.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think they lost their way in that game a bit, not really sure whether to play it safe and see it out because Liverpool can always hurt you, or how to play up 10 men, up a goal at home. Nunez comes on, scores an unbelievable brace. If you look at that game on XG, it was Newcastle 2.0 to Liverpool 0.9.
Yeah.
Newcastle had 60% of the ball. I just think they blew it. But if you look at their losses, it's a close 1-0 to City away in a game
Yeah.
where neither team did much. It's a
Mm-hmm.
3-1 away to Brighton, where the underlying metrics were quite even. Brighton finished better. And it's the Liverpool game that I think is a little fluky. If that Liverpool game finishes with Newcastle on top, then I think we're looking at a very different kind of evaluation of Newcastle because, first of
Mm-hmm.
all, then they'd be on 16 points. So they'd be right
Yep.
there, one behind Liverpool. They'd be in the mix,
Well,
right?
they'll be above out Liverpool actually because they'll be
Well, they'd be
keeping
above
Liverpool.
them on, right, of course, obviously, right? Because Liverpool would have
Yeah.
3 fewer. So Liverpool would be on 14. Newcastle would be on 16. They would be tied with Villa and Brighton, but ahead on goal difference in fourth place. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we'd be looking at them quite a bit differently because they've beaten PSG. They obviously humiliated Sheffield United. What was that, like 8-0, I
Yeah.
want to say?
No, crazy.
Um, so it's tough. I mean, they played good teams. City, Villa, Liverpool, Brighton, Brentford, West Ham, City again in the EFL Cup, PSG in the Champions League, and Milan. They drew
Mm-hmm.
Milan. They beat PSG. They beat City in the Cup. They beat Villa 5-1 on the opening day. They won, beat Brentford. It's that City, Liverpool, Brighton run where they lost 3 in a row that I think formed so much of the narrative. But losing the
Mm-hmm.
City away 1-0 is kind of nothing. We covered the Liverpool loss, and the Brighton one was more of an even game, and it's away, home away. So I just think in general, like, Newcastle are probably very, very, very good, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And what'll be really interesting with Newcastle as we sort of look at where they're going from here is what they do, you know, when when they get a run where it gets a little bit easier because they have had a tough start. So
Yeah.
I think I have Newcastle kind of right there with Liverpool as that team that's
Yeah.
probably right outside of
Same.
the out of the groupings of Arsenal and Manchester City.
Yeah, and I think like something that people don't take into consideration is that two of their very big attacking components that they expected to have this season, one has got injured very early in the season in Harvey Barnes, and then the other is Joe Willock, who hasn't played at all this season. And
Mm,
I know all of the Arsenal fans have mixed opinions on him. However, I think he has suited their style to a T and
yeah.
was very, very important to them in the running last year when they were smashing Spurs 5-1 and they were going on a beaten run to get the top four. And all that is a comeback into them. And I also think that they have a lot better depth than the likes of Manchester United and Spurs even have. Because
Mm,
we are talking about in their start 11 right now, there is no Willock, there is no Hall, there is no Wilson, there is no Barnes, there is no Livermento. There is depth there. There are players there who could probably start for the aforementioned teams. So I feel the same way with you that I have them right up there. A team that's a bit more kamikaze in the way they play and very mixed bag in results, despite being above Newcastle, though, is Brighton. They are probably the most entertaining side to watch in the league because you know what you're going to get from them. You're going to get attacking, entertaining football. However, results have been very hit or miss with them. They are yet to win in the Europa League. They have 5 wins, 1 draw, 2 losses. And it feels like if they are always capable of being right on that edge where they'll go from asking the question, should we be in Champions League football, to showing the fallacy that upper mid-table teams show. What do you think?
mm. By the way, one thing I'll say about Newcastle to keep an eye on is Sandro Tonali being questioned by the police in a betting
Oh,
investigation. So
yeah.
if he were to go, I in some way that would certainly have an impact. I don't think that's going to happen, but just keep an eye on. Brighton, yeah. Look, you know what Brighton look like to me? Brighton look like a team to me that wants to bring bring teams onto them, play through them, right, and score lots of fun goals with nice back to front build up and a lot of slick passing moves, but don't have Moises Caicedo anymore to clean things up going the other direction when teams turn them
Mm,
around. And so
yeah.
what's really happened is I think the solidity in the middle of the park has gone, and they just look a lot more vulnerable. And as a result, what you have with Brighton is the team that has created among the most expected goals in the Premier League, just a titch behind Liverpool, but barely.
Yeah.
By the way, Newcastle topped that list, although a little of that is weighted by that 8-0 against Sheffield United. But then if you look at them in terms of defense, they're solidly in the bottom half. They've conceded 16 goals, and
Yeah.
you can't be conceding goals at that rate. I mean, that is 17th in the league through 8 games. You can't be conceding goals at that rate, regardless of the 21 they've scored, which is extraordinary, right? The
Yeah.
most in the league. Um, and I think expect to be there in the end. They have so much attacking talent. They have such a fun team to watch. I think De Zerbi is really interesting, and what he does with that team is sensational. But ultimately, I think you lose a guy like Caicedo, and suddenly it gets very difficult when you lose possession, or when teams, when you're all the way up the pitch and teams play through you, to stop teams
Hmm.
going the other direction. So they're letting up a lot of shots. I think they're too easy to counter on, and I'll be curious to see if De Zerbi can find a way to shut that down. Because if he doesn't, I think the defensive frailty will probably see them start to drop a bit, which is unfortunate because they're obviously a team I think everybody, as a neutral outside of their own team, would root for staying up there.
Hmm. And I think that was something to also note too is that we always praise Brighton recruitment, and rightfully so. They have done extraordinarily well. But I think like if we could draw a very small parallel to when Leicester was like this and everybody was praising they got Kante, Mahrez, and go down the line with it, there do come some failures in recruitment along the way with that. And sometimes the trick could only be repeated so much to get this random diamond from here and random diamond from there.
Mm.
Sometimes it runs out a bit. And on a side, as we are recording, Fabrizio Romano has just announced that the Glazers has informed Sheikh Jassim the decision that they will not be accepting his latest bid, and he has withdrawn from buying over Manchester United.
Lovely.
So that is phenomenal news. Glazers in. Moving
Mm.
on. Next up, we actually have Liverpool, and I kind of wouldn't mind grouping Liverpool and Tottenham in one, so we could discuss City and then us.
Okay.
Um, because I actually do think there's a lot of similarities between the two of them. And now the thing is, I trust Liverpool's attack to be way more sustainable across the entirety of the season compared to Spurs. But both of them defensive metrics are very, very similar. Now, I will offer Liverpool the caveat that they've had like red cards nearly every, it feels like every other game this season. And that does change game states and how they're affected and stuff like that. However, the lack of a true 6 foot Liverpool has showed this season. It showed last week against Brighton when they drew 2-2. And Tottenham is one that have had clean sheets, but even given the fact that they face the bottom four in the league, their defensive metrics have them about mid-table. And I think that would be a concern. But more focusing on Liverpool. Do you think that the entire season is set up to be more kamikaze games? Do you think it's a case of settling the midfield together, getting a unit together in the backline that hasn't gotten to play together often? Where do you stand on it?
Yeah. Uh, so let me say this about Liverpool, right?
Hmm.
I fall into the group of people that believes if you have to choose between being a team that can really shut the back door or really go pound on the opposition, choose the latter. If you're going to be half a team, be an attacking team because it's just a
Hmm.
hell of a lot more fun,
Yeah.
right? Um, if I have to watch a team be incomplete, I'd rather watch an incomplete team that has the ability to go beat someone 7-1 or 8-2 or 4-0 or whatever the case may be, even if I
Hmm.
know we're going to fall short of our objectives because occasionally we're going to just concede too many goals because we can't shut the back door.
Hmm.
And I think that's where Liverpool are right now. I think Liverpool are up there in terms of the most entertaining and dangerous teams in the league. Their midfield's not balanced. I mean, you talk about a team that could use Declan Rice or could have used Caicedo for that matter. They're a Declan Rice or Caicedo away probably from being very, very, very scary.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also think that the center back pairing is running its course.
Hmm.
It's not as elite as it was. They rely on Allison a lot, which is lucky for them. He's probably the best in the world, and so that helps. Um, They only have one fullback that really fullbacks at all. Alexander Arnold does not. So you have a not really defensive right back. You have fading center backs. You have no stopper in the center of the park. And then you've just got these dynamic players all over the place, whether it's, Soboslai or McAllister and Jota and Suarez, Diaz and Salah and Darwin and Gakpo. I mean, you name it, they can just go outshoot you, basically,
Mm-hmm.
like old school Western style shootout. Which is fun, but I do think that the lack of midfield control and the lack of defensive organization is going to mean that they can't achieve the biggest things in the right. First of all, they don't have Champions League. I'll be curious to see how seriously they take the
Europa League.
Europa League. Right?
Yeah.
Will they really go for it and try to win it? Because they've got to be a favorite to win it, obviously. And if they do that, then we know that's going to take a further toll on their domestic season.
Mm-hmm.
I expect Liverpool to finish probably fourth or fifth because I think they will just be a hell of a lot of fun at times, score a hell of a lot of goals, but just drop too many silly points because they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable, and there's going to be some games where they're scratching their head saying, "How didn't we win that?" The reason's going to be because they conceded dumb goals. I know it's rich from an Arsenal fan saying concede dumb goals, but I think we're sitting here having conceded
No,
six this season in total.
exactly.
So
We are the general authority on conceding
yeah, we know all about it.
unnecessarily stupid goals. Um, I agree with almost everything that you said there, Elliot. The one thing I would mildly disagree with is that I do think that Virgil has looked a little more like himself this season. I think he's adjusted to himself post ACL a bit more this season. However, I do agree that he has been surrounded by a lot of uneven performances around him. I think Robertson does get caught between if he should stay back and be an extra centre back while Trent inverts and goes forward. Trent has also been injured for a part of the season so far, and there has been a lot of instability and unfamiliarity going on with Liverpool so far. I do think that if there is some going forward, that they can reduce some of it, but I do think that the fact that their midfield composition just probably isn't going to change, then they still would have to face a lot going the other way. However, as you rightfully said, look, Allison might be an all timer just on his ability alone, and that could sometimes be enough to. Because, like, I remember when John Terry lied to us and said that Petr Cech would save us 12 to 15 points a season. Allison does that. And does that and more. He probably saves them 20 to 80 to 20 points a season. So, and on the other hand, now you have Tottenham, who also are trying to be a very attacking outfit. However, their metrics really doesn't support the defense the other side. And unlike Liverpool, they don't have personnel missing or a true somebody missing. This is their team. This is what they are supposed to be. And even against Luton last week, Luton had chances, didn't score. We see it over and over with the teams that they face. And even in the big games, Elliot, that they've managed to get results, a draw at us, beating Liverpool, beating Manchester United, they have been wrecked with individual errors from the opposition. And yes, it's part of football. I'm not saying no, but missed chances by the opposition and refereeing controversy. And you have to feel like that isn't sustainable to see them maintain not just first, but probably a top 3, 4 position across the whole season.
They have a few issues. So first of all, you're right. I mean, like, if Jorginho doesn't let the ball roll under his foot inexplicably with plenty of time to do everything, like we win the derby, and if
Mm-hmm.
Liverpool aren't completely screwed by the referees, I don't know if Spurs win that. And you turn that
Mm-hmm.
around, and all of a sudden, there's not much of a story around
Yeah.
Tottenham.
Yeah.
I think from an attacking standpoint, we know Richarlison ain't it. He's kind of proven that. He's a player that I always rated, but it just hasn't worked for him there. And I think trying to rely on Heung-min Son for the entirety of the season is probably going to just not work out over time, where he is in his career, and whether he will hold up playing center forward for them all season long, I think is a question. They have no Europe, so that's a huge advantage. I mean, I think if you're going to
Mm-hmm.
try to keep someone like Son, for example, fit all season and firing, then that's going to work out. I think having no Europe is going to be to their advantage. They have played, I think, pretty well in the sense of they played pretty well in the sense that the football they're playing is not suffer ball anymore. It's not Conte
Mm-hmm.
ball anymore. It's not Mourinho ball anymore. It's not incomprehensible dross. It is good, good, high quality, possession oriented football that gets them into the right parts of the pitch and creates opportunities for them. I just think that they look like a team that's not really fully baked yet. Obviously, as you'd expect, it's the first year under Ange, and I don't think the team is fully baked. I think the combination of what they're trying to rely on for goals ultimately might hold them back. I mean, depending on
Mm-hmm.
how long Son can stay fit for, if you were to lose him, Kulishevsky, I don't think has been quite as good as when he first arrived. Obviously, Richarlison,
Mm-hmm.
as I mentioned, hasn't worked out. James Madison's been good, but he's not a major goal scorer. I just don't know if there's enough goals in the team. If anything
Mm-hmm.
were to happen to Son, or if he faded a bit, as we've seen in previous seasons, and then the rest of it is all just very workmanlike. I mean, I know they rate Van de Ven highly, and they rate Udagi, and they rate Cudi Romero. I'm a little more, I would say,
Yeah.
suspect on that. Vicario also, I'm not sure I believe in. So, you know what they're going to be? They're going to be Liverpool light in my view, which is
Yep.
fun
Yep.
to watch, good on the eye. Going to concede too many chances to consistently pick up points, but unlike Liverpool, I'm not sure they will score as many goals as the quality of their play might allow them to if they had a stronger attacking platoon. So Liverpool light for me is what they are.
Yeah. Fair enough. I totally agree with that. Next up is Man City, who have been without KDB for the entirety of the season.
Mm.
And they had no Rodri for the last three domestic games. And for those of you who have not seen an Arsenal fan plaster this all over social media, they have not had Rodri for the last three games. They've lost all three games. And one of those games is losing to Arsenal 1-0 at the Emirates Stadium. And people mocked us, and to some extent, I think it's justified. But when we said that Saliba going out in the last 3 months of last season cost us a big part of the title, it doesn't mean that we were definitely going to win it, but we'd have finished the season a lot stronger than we did. I honestly believe we would not have drawn at Anfield, and I think that changes a lot to the ripple effects it has afterwards. And so I think some people are getting a bit more context now with the fact that Rodri missed three seasons, three losses. That sometimes you have players that are not just that good as an individual, but are that important to the way that your entire team plays that it can be detrimental without them. They have felt a bit labored in attack, but because their attacking metrics are actually quite similar to ours, which we'll come to when it's time to talk about us. But what is your general feel about Man City so far this season?
I think Manchester City and Arsenal are the same exact team this season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I don't think you can I don't think you can differentiate between them. They're so similar. They are two teams that are defending at an extraordinarily elite level in
Yeah,
terms of shot suppression, in
insane.
terms of
Yeah.
control, field tilt.
Mm-hmm.
They are two teams that are creating less than you'd expect or hope. And they're
Mm-hmm.
two teams that can tell themselves a story that the reason for that is due to the absence of some players.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever you want to say about him, Kevin De Bruyne, Kevin De Bruyne is just the oil in the engine there. And having
Yep.
no Gundogan, like I think that impacts them as well.
Yep.
They are a more workman-like team this season in terms of how they try to create chances. And they've had games where you'd expect them to go blast teams. I mean, the Wolves game, I think they created less than an expected goal.
Yeah.
It reminds
They
me a
did.
little last season, in fact, early in the season when people were asking questions, does Holland make them worse, actually? And the obvious answer was no, Holland doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
them worse. That's idiotic. But Holland does change where the burden falls and how you have to try to create chances. If he gets 3 touches, he's probably going to have a hat trick,
Mm-hmm.
but he's not going to help you play your way through and around low blocks all the time. He's a battering
Mm-hmm.
ram, right? More than he is a lock picker. And so I don't know if they haven't clicked in attack. They're still excellent. They're right there at the top of
Yeah.
the table. They're going to be right there at the end. They have too much talent not to be. Everybody's focused on missing Rodri, but the real focus should be on missing De Bruyne. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you want to look at, say, they've lost the 3 games when Rodri didn't play. Well, what does Rodri do? He gives you a measure of control, right? He gives you a measure of midfield control. Okay, great. So let's look at what's actually happened in the games they played without Rodri. They played Arsenal, who created zero 0.4 expected goals, and they had 51% possession against Arsenal, which I don't think you can be super critical of that. Wolves,
Mm-hmm.
who beat them 2-1, created point 0.4 expected goals, and City had 70% of the ball, right? And then there's the Newcastle EFL Cup game, which is, whatever, it's cup tie. I mean, they still were fairly dominant in that one. So I just think they're us, right? They're a team that is dominating the ball, dominating the field, dominant defensively, not creating as much as you'd expect. And they're going to tell you the reason is some absences and integrating some new parts.
Can I
And
also
if you
say
ask an
that
Arsenal fan to describe our season, it's probably the same thing, isn't it?
can I say that along with KDB being out, and I swear I don't mean this disrespectfully at all, but they
Mhm.
have won titles with KDB being out before. I think,
Yeah.
as you pointed out, the real miss to me is not having Gundogan there. Like, I think like he's actually been very underrated in how he has contributed to
Yeah.
them over the last few seasons, just being a conduit through the entirety of the attack and the way that he could have just shown up big for them and change game states. And like, I think people underestimate how important game states are in games, and how you could view the game at the end. Like, a game that is 1-1-0 from the 7th minute could look super comfortable all the way down to the end. Whereas a game that is 1-1-0 in the 86th minute, it could have looked like an entirely cagey game for the entirety of the game. And so that is where I think they are missing Gundogan a huge bulk. Like, if we look back at the results last season, when after they beat us, it's like a string of goals and assists from Gundogan to see out the title. And I think that's where he was really important. I agree. I don't think that they are necessarily lacking control, which is what Rodri has been offering. And I asked the question on our last pod, and I continue to ask it: when do we actually start to ask Foden to step up and be an important and dependable cog into this Man City team? Because if we draw any comparisons with him to any other young Englishman, whether it be Saka, it be Jude Bellingham, whoever it may be, he never has had to take on the responsibility that those players have had, and never had to show that he can carry that responsibility and carry the team along with it. And I ask again that if it is a case of Foden can't do it when KDB is out, and somebody who is supposed to have been the most prestigious talent since Wayne Rooney, then when are we going to see it? When are we going to see the step up from him? Or is it that Pep that we all consider to be, at the very least, one of the greatest managers, if not the greatest, sees him as just a squad player and can't be dependent on us more?
I don't know. I mean, you're talking about a manager who froze out Leroy Sané, for one reason or another, probably
Yeah.
personality related more than anything. Um, Maybe Foden just hasn't kicked on. I mean, look at what happened with Calvin Phillips at City. Like, not that Calvin
Hmm.
Phillips is a Foden level talent, but he did the weird thing against us where he played with no width, no wide players really, which is strange because I think a strength of Pep's teams has always been the way they take up wide positions and stretch you across the pitch
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
cut back. Now, granted, they used to do that with fullbacks like Danny Alves at Barca. Um, at times they've done that right with Walker. They tried to do it with Guardiol against us. They're playing more with four CBs.
Hmm.
These days, four center backs across the back line, but they still find ways to get into those pockets of space. Pep is, he's in the kitchen right now, isn't he? Right? He's in the lab figuring out what the mix is this season, keeping it fresh, keeping everybody ready for the season. You know how it's going to be. When January, February rolls around, he's going to find a team he likes. Champions League knockouts come back around. You're going to see that team play 20 games straight, and that's the team he's going to try to win with. Considering that we have questions about Manchester City, I think they can feel just fine being 2 points off the top. You know,
Hmm.
um, like I don't think that it's going to scare them that they're 2 points behind Arsenal and Spurs when they were as far
Can
behind as they were last season. So
can I tell you
City are
something
probably
mildly
fine is the
scary?
answer. Yeah,
The last time that Pep Guardiola has lost 2 league games in a row, he went on to win the next 19 in a row to win the
there you
title on the last day. So let's hope for not a repeat of that, because
go.
that is very traumatic to have to deal with as an opposition. The last thing I'll ask about this before we go on to Arsenal is that with City going forward, I don't necessarily think that there should be much concern, because as we see with us, that people laugh at advanced metrics, that and I do think that there is a place and time for that. Sometimes they get overlapped into where they really should be. But when you look at things like field tilt and stuff, when you are so good at dominating games and at controlling the pace of games, then it's almost a case of just wearing on the opposition. And if it is a case of that, that's where Pep's going. until he can get KD back, until he gets Matthias Nunez and Doku and whoever may be integrated into the team, then I don't think that there's cause of concern there. But do you think that there's possibly any point of concern for City that can come up, or is it a case where we just trust Pep to fix whoever it is that comes this way?
There's absolutely no concern whatsoever. They're the best team in the world, and they will likely go on to win the treble again.
Yeah.
That's the reality. I hope it doesn't happen. I think we can push them. I think we are the best opportunity for it not to happen. But if you're betting, that's what you'd bet on. You know?
Yeah. Cool. Moving on to us for the last couple minutes of this. So first up, obviously, everybody know kind of like what has been going on with us. We won against Man City, which has been great. That is now 2 international breaks in a row. We sent Manchester-based fans into a spiral for
I
2
love
weeks.
it. I love it.
And
Yeah.
we'll never change that for anything in the world. We actually 2-0 against Pep for the season as well. Never thought I would have said that. But in terms of like the more granular points with us, there have been some issues where the difference with us and City is that City has credit in the bank, that they can be seen as just clicking on until they click. Whereas with us, because of we still reaching that elite status, there will be questions being asked. So one of them is the attack. We haven't really clicked in attack so far this season. We've actually only scored 7 or 6 open play goals. The rest split between penalties and set pieces. For one, I'm loving the fact that we are actually getting so much penalties, which again feel tilt. You occupy the opposition box so much, they must make mistakes. But there are concerns over it. I personally believe a lot of it is just down to the fact that we haven't seen the front three that light up the world last season play together. However, I want to know if you think anything beyond that.
No, well, I mean, a few things, right? So we're seeing Granit Xhaka go and dominate the Bundesliga, and
Be top of it.
yeah, I would fall into the category of people that probably has underappreciated the role he played, especially last season. I felt strongly that that position is one where if we could tweak it towards being a slightly more attack-oriented, box-oriented player, that we could go from strength to strength and actually improve. We tried to do that with the player we recruited. It just so happens that that hasn't really clicked yet, and may never. I don't want to say that it is a foregone conclusion that Kai Havertz is going to turn out to be the right player for the role that we had envisioned in that position.
Yeah,
I also don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he won't, by the way, but that's another story. I think Gabriel Jesus is really the only player we have at Arsenal that falls into the category of potentially elite center forwards. And he hasn't started a Premier League game at center forward for us this season yet.
That's so crazy to think about.
So it's a major thing. And whether you like Eddie Nketiah or don't, I mean, everybody likes him. He's an academy player. We love that. And congrats to him getting his England call up. I think it's great. And not just the call up, they actually capped
his debut
and playing.
yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah.
The fact is, Eddie Nketiah, in my view, is, for me, at best, a lower third of the table center forward, but probably a championship center forward if he wanted to be a starter somewhere. I don't know that he starts in the Premier League. Maybe, but I don't think so. And that's who we've started at center forward, 7 of 8 games, and really 7.5 of 8 games. I think Kai Havertz is probably the better option there if we have to play someone other than Jesus. Not everyone's going to agree with that. Fair enough. But the point is, we haven't played with the only, I think, elite caliber center forward option that we have. We haven't played with him yet at center forward. We haven't been able to use the front three that you named. That's a big part of it as well, obviously. And so I think that's a factor. We've chopped and changed a lot. We tried Partey at right back. Then we lost Partey, so we lost that verticality. We didn't have, right? You can tell yourself the same story that City would tell themselves. All of the things that create automatisms that allow you to really understand where your chances are going to come from have been absent. Our primary ball progressor absent, and then Rice had to come in and kind of learn that role coming from a team where he had played suffered ball. And our primary center forward absent or not playing at center forward. And our sort of midfield hybrid left 8 who's going and dominating the Bundesliga gone, replaced by a guy who looks like a bit of a fish out of water in that role. All of these things make a difference. And then you have games where like Martinelli's absent and Trossard's absent. So you're starting with weird stuff, players that you wouldn't necessarily want to use in positions you necessarily wouldn't want to use them. I look at the derby. We started the derby with Eddie Nketiah through the middle, Jesus through the left. Rice came off at halftime, right? I mean, all of
Mm-hmm.
these things have factored. But the last key thing that I think needs to be acknowledged as well is Arsenal Football Club aren't a surprise anymore. And as a result, we are playing deeper and deeper and deeper blocks and more counter-oriented attacks and more organized, resilient defenses that understand that what they're going to have to do is sit back and stay compact through the middle. And we're trying to find new ways to break through that. So the combination of coming up against what City have come up against for years now, combined with a very mix and match midfield and attack over the course of the season, I think can explain it. Give us a run of 3 or 4 games where we play Jesus, Martinelli, and Saka up front, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and ideally some kind of first choice midfield behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't click then, if we don't look like us then, that'd be interesting. It's worth pointing out, by the way, probably our best attacking performance of the season, the 4-0 against PSV. Granted, they were pretty open. They came at us. But we did have Jesus start through the middle there. We did have more like a first choice front three. So
Yeah.
I'm cautiously optimistic that it is a personnel issue and that we will figure it out.
Yeah, and I think like as you're rightfully said with like Partey not being out, like we've lost a lot of progression on the ball with him not being there, with Xhaka not being there, and with facilitators as well as the fact that our midfield seems to be taking on some very different identities and roles this season, which is where I would like to go to next, where there's a Kai Havertz conversation, which I fully recommend guys to subscribe to their Patreon, by the way, which they have done this to death. But for those of you who haven't, there's a Kai Havertz conversation, as well as I do think that there is some conversation to have around Odegaard as well. For those who have listened to me for a very long time, know that I took some time to come around to Odegaard, and I'm a lot closer to him now than I was before. And now it is a case of where I have a gripe where he doesn't hit the level to be one of the best players in the world, which is a criticism and a comment in itself. I think that he might be overshooting a little bit this season, when even more so when Jesus is out or Jesus isn't playing center forward, he is charged with being a facilitator. On top of that, on the other side, we have somebody who definitely looks like a fish out of water with Kai Havertz. Um, and I don't think it should be underestimated that when he was coming out of Leverkusen, he was seen as like the prodigy talent of one of like expected to win Ballon d'Ors in years to come and stuff like that. And how backwards his career has gone at Chelsea, and we are now trying to undo a lot of damage that has been done over 3 years. And there are some Chelsea fans that will probably take that as a criticism, but on the way to success, there's sometimes players that are damaged. And I know that there are Chelsea fans that would not trade that UCL won in 2021 for a thing, which Kai Havertz scored the winner for, by the way. And but along the way, over these last 3 years, I think Kai Havertz became more and more lost. And I have yet to see a player that Arsenal have had in years that has come across with such fractured confidence in what he's capable of doing. So, midfield Elliott, thoughts?
Midfield. I think to hit our absolute ceiling for what we can achieve, I think it would probably be worth trying to get it to work with Kai Havertz.
Me
I think
too.
there is
Yeah.
if you look at the multiverse, there's a universe where Kai Havertz sort of figures out how to crash the box and get on the end of back post crosses, and Odegaard figures out how to find him with those crosses, and Jesus is in there playing 1-2s with him so that he can get on the end of stuff and make his little wall passes on the edge of the box, and he figures out how to slip those little balls into Martinelli, stretching the defense, and it works, and he's sort of a 10 goal, 10 assist type guy who just makes us better. I think that's the best case scenario that would be good to try to accomplish, to try to get to.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we can spend all season trying to get there. And that means if Havertz doesn't start to look a little more dynamic and a little more switched on, a little more integrated in the attack once we have something more like our regular lineup, then I think the manager has to consider Party Rice Odegaard or even
Mm-hmm.
Rice Jorginho Odegaard as the trio that he goes with more often than not. Will that have enough final third entries and penalty box entries and goal scoring. I think it can. I think we saw, look at Rice against City. He takes that great ball recovery off of City in the attacking third, slides it through to Martinelli, gets that shot straight at Ederson. A really nice little move there. And that's a beautiful little slip ball, left footed slip through ball from Rice. So, best case scenario is one where it's Havertz, Odegaard, and Rice, in my view.
Hmm.
And Party plays maybe sometimes at that right back position, even though people hate it, or as an alternate to Rice, or as an alternate to Havertz in games we want to control, like against City, the big clubs away. Maybe it's Chelsea away. But the best case scenario for me is if we can get Havertz to work, essentially.
Yeah, agreed. You have any concern about Odegaard's decision making right now, or
Hmm. Yeah, I do. No, this is the hard thing, right? Language matters, right?
yeah,
Do I have any concern over Odegaard's decision making? Odegaard's expected assists are way down.
yeah,
Odegaard's expected goals are actually quite a bit down.
his final third passes are
Here's what
down
it
as
is.
well.
He's not taking more shots. He's taking worse shots. His expected goals per shot is down. He's taking more
Mm,
shots that I would say are hit and hope, where he's not set, where he's not arriving on time, where he's not, beating a man and curling it. But we did a rewatch of the City game, and you can clearly see two instances where he just runs onto it and swings wildly. When on the other side, over on the left, you had two
that
players
leaves
standing in
open.
space, and I
Hmm.
feel like Odegaard of last season
Sees
would make the
them.
extra pass, would see
Yeah,
himself as a distributor. He's captain, he's got a new contract, he's got a lot of responsibility on him, and I think he's one of the best players in the league. So I'm not worried about Odegaard. I just think that the scales have tipped a bit too much
yeah. And I think
towards,
like if
you
it
know,
if it scales back just a fraction, then we having a conversation with somebody who could be the best midfielder in the
I
league.
totally agree. Totally agree.
And yeah, we're gonna wrap up now. But before that, I just wanted to interject that we have Saliba and Gabriel. They are phenomenal. I
Yeah.
love them. I am a massive. I actually have one Saliba on the back of this, and on the wall. I don't know if you can see the Arsenal kid. That's Gabriel there as well. I would not trade them for anybody. I think Gabriel has come leaps and bounds. I have no point to make here other than I just wanted to praise them, and even more particular Gabriel. Like everybody loves Saliba. It is clear to see that he is a once in a generation type player. But like I think so many times people see Gabriel as like this bomb that Saliba carries around, and it's so not the case. And I don't think without them we could be in the position where we are now, where we are talking about trying to contest Manchester City and beating Manchester City. So yeah.
Yeah,
Um
I agree.
that being said, guys, we wrap it up there. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Elliot, again for your time. Elliot is on Twitter at Yankee Gunner, and you can find him on All Things Arsenal Vision podcast. They are currently up for the FCE Awards. I believe that's what it is. And
Hmm.
on their Twitter, you can find the link to go and vote for them. Highly recommend that you do. So, Elliot, thanks again for coming.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
And we'll catch you guys next time. See you soon. Take it easy. Later.